I woke up at 6 in the morning to find my Tesla's battery at 15% when it should have been fully charged. And that's when I knew something was seriously wrong. My name is Quentin Torres, and I'm a software engineer living in Scottsdale, Arizona. I'd just bought my dream house in a nice neighborhood called Desert Springs Estates about 3 months ago. The place had everything I wanted: a pool, a modern kitchen, and most importantly, a garage where I could install my Level 2 EV charger. I'd dropped $2,000 on a high-quality charge point unit and paid another $800 to have it professionally installed. Everything had been working perfectly for the first 2 weeks. Then the problem started. At first, I thought it was a technical malfunction. I'd plug in my Model 3 before bed, and when I'd wake up to head to my office in downtown Phoenix, the battery would only be partially charged. Sometimes it would be at 40%, other times at 25%. It made no sense. The charger had a built-in display that showed connection status, and every time I checked it in the morning, it would show that charging had been interrupted hours earlier. I called ChargePoint support 3 times. They ran remote diagnostics and found nothing wrong with the unit itself. The technician suggested it might be a problem with my home's electrical system, so I paid an electrician $250 to inspect everything. He checked the breaker box, tested the voltage, examined all the connections, and declared everything was perfect. "Your system is solid, man," he'd said, scratching his head. "Whatever's happening, it's not on your end electrically speaking." The issue continued for another week. I was getting frustrated because I had to stop at supercharger stations on my way to work, which added 20 minutes to my commute each way. I started keeping a log, noting exactly when I plugged in and what the battery level was in the morning. The pattern was consistent. Charging would stop somewhere between midnight and 3 in the morning. One Thursday evening, I decided to stay up and see what happened. I made a pot of coffee, settled into my living room with my laptop, and waited. At around 1:30 in the morning, I heard something outside. It was faint, but definitely the sound of my garage door area. I quietly moved to the window that faced the driveway. That's when I saw her. Sharon Whitmore, the president of our HOA, was standing in my driveway in a bathrobe and slippers, unplugging my EV charger from the wall outlet. She carefully wrapped the cord, placed it on the ground, and then walked back across the street to her house like she'd just completed some noble civic duty. I stood there in complete shock. My heart was pounding. I'd met Sharon exactly twice before. Once during my house closing when she'd introduced herself and handed me a thick binder of HOA rules, and once at a neighborhood meeting where she'd spent 40 minutes lecturing everyone about proper trash can placement. She was probably in her mid-50s, with that stereotypical blonde bob haircut and the kind of pinched expression that suggested she spent most of her time looking for things to disapprove of. I wanted to confront her right then, but something told me to wait. I needed proof. If I accused her without evidence, it would be her word against mine, and as HOA president, she probably had more sway in the neighborhood than the new guy who'd just moved in. The next morning, I drove to Best Buy and spent $400 on a high-quality security camera system. I installed one camera focused directly on my garage entrance and EV charger with a clear view of anyone who might approach. The camera had night vision, motion detection, and saved everything to cloud storage. I also installed a second camera covering my driveway and front door, just in case. That night, I plugged in my Tesla and went to bed with my phone next to me, notifications enabled for any motion detection. At 1:47 in the morning, my phone buzzed. I opened the app and watched in real time as Sharon Whitmore, once again in her bathrobe, walked across the street, entered my driveway, and unplugged my charger. The night vision footage was crystal clear. You could see her face, her deliberate movements, everything. She even looked around before doing it, which showed consciousness of wrongdoing. I saved the footage immediately and went back to sleep, knowing I finally had what I needed. But I wanted more than just one night of evidence. I let it continue for an entire week, documenting every single incident. Sharon came 5 out of those 7 nights. Twice she skipped, probably because it was raining. Each time the footage was perfect. Clear shots of her face, clear shots of her unplugging the charger, clear timestamps. After collecting a week's worth of evidence, I decided it was time to confront her. I printed out screenshots from the footage, burned the videos onto a USB drive, and walked across the street to her house on a Saturday morning. Sharon answered the door, wearing tennis whites, like she was about to head to the country club. Her expression soured the moment she saw me. "Quentin," she said, managing to make my name sound like an accusation. "What can I do for you?" "We need to talk about my EV charger," I said calmly. Her eyes narrowed. "What about it?" "You've been unplugging it. Every night, I have video evidence." For just a second, I saw panic flash across her face, but she recovered quickly. "That's ridiculous. Why would I do that?" I held up one of the printed screenshots. It clearly showed her face and her hand on my charger cable. "This is from 3 nights ago, 1:47 in the morning. I have footage from 5 different nights, all time-stamped, all showing you entering my property and unplugging my charger." Sharon's face turned red. "You can't have cameras pointing at the street. That's a violation of HOA rules." "My cameras are on my property, pointing at my property. That's completely legal. What's not legal is you trespassing and interfering with my property." She crossed her arms. "Your electric vehicle charger is a violation. It's not explicitly approved in the HOA guidelines." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I filled out the architectural modification request form. I submitted it 6 weeks before installation. I never heard back, which according to the HOA bylaws means automatic approval after 30 days. "I don't recall seeing any such request," Sharon said primly. "I have the certified mail receipt showing it was delivered to your address. You signed for it." Her jaw clenched. "Even so, those chargers are unsightly and they don't fit the aesthetic standards of Desert Springs Estates. The charger is inside my garage. You can't even see it from the street. It's still inappropriate. Electric vehicles are a fad, and we don't need to be encouraging them in this neighborhood. They're expensive, they're impractical, and frankly, they're un-American." I stared at her, trying to process the sheer audacity of what I was hearing. "You've been trespassing on my property and vandalizing my equipment because you don't like electric cars?" "I'm protecting property values," Sharon said, her voice rising. "When people drive through looking at houses, they don't want to see all this environmental nonsense. It attracts the wrong kind of people." "I'm going to give you one chance," I said, keeping my voice level. "Stop touching my property. If you have a legitimate HOA concern, we can discuss it through proper channels. But the trespassing and unplugging stops now." Sharon's eyes went cold. "Or what?" "Or I'll take legal action." She laughed, actually laughed. "Good luck with that. I've been HOA president for 8 years. I know every lawyer in Scottsdale. You're just some tech worker who thinks he can come into an established neighborhood and do whatever he wants. You need to learn how things work around here." I turned to leave, then paused. "I'm giving you this one warning. What you do next is your choice." That night, I plugged in my charger as usual. At 2:15 in the morning, my phone buzzed. Sharon was back unplugging my charger, but this time, she did something extra. She took out a pair of scissors and cut the charging cable about 3 feet from the plug. I watched it happen in real time on my phone. I couldn't believe it. The woman had just destroyed a $2,000 piece of equipment. The footage captured everything perfectly. Her face, the scissors, the deliberate cutting of the cable. I immediately saved the footage to 3 different locations: cloud storage, my computer, and an external hard drive. Then I called the Scottsdale Police Department non-emergency line. The dispatcher told me an officer would come by in the morning to take a report. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I was too angry, too wound up. Sharon had escalated this from annoying trespassing to deliberate destruction of property. Officer Patricia Mendez showed up at 8 in the morning. She was professional and thorough, listening to my whole story while taking notes. I showed her all the footage on my laptop, the week of unplugging, and finally, the destruction of the charger cable. "This is pretty clear-cut," Officer Mendez said. "Criminal trespass and criminal damage. The damage is over $1,000, so that's felony territory. Do you want to press charges?" "Absolutely," she nodded. "I'll need copies of all this footage. We'll prepare a report and forward it to the county attorney's office. Given the video evidence, they'll likely file charges. In the meantime, I'd recommend you install a lock on your garage entrance or some way to secure your property." "Will you be arresting her?" "Not immediately. For something like this, they usually issue a summons to appear in court rather than making an arrest. But that'll be up to the county attorney and the judge." Officer Mendez took her time documenting everything. She photographed the cut cable, the charger unit, the installation. She took copies of all my video files. She even went across the street and spoke with Sharon, though I wasn't privy to that conversation. When she came back, her expression was carefully neutral. "Let's just say Mrs. Whitmore has a very different interpretation of events," she said. "But the evidence speaks for itself. You should hear from the county attorney's office within a few weeks." After she left, I contacted ChargePoint about replacing my cable. They informed me that a replacement cable for my unit would cost $1,800 and take 2 weeks to ship. I also called a locksmith and had a heavy-duty lock installed on the exterior garage door access panel where the charger plugged into its dedicated outlet. Then I did something I'd been avoiding. I actually read through the entire HOA rules and regulations binder Sharon had given me. It was 147 pages of mind-numbing bureaucracy, but I forced myself through every word. What I found was interesting. The HOA did have architectural guidelines that required pre-approval for certain modifications, but there was also a clear provision stating that if the architectural committee failed to respond to a request within 30 days, the request was automatically approved. I had proof of my submission and proof that more than 30 days had passed before installation. My charger was completely legitimate under HOA rules. I also discovered that Sharon had been overstepping her authority in multiple ways. The HOA president was supposed to be part of a 5-person board with major decisions requiring a majority vote. She'd been acting unilaterally on numerous issues, treating the HOA like her personal fiefdom. This gave me an idea. Over the next few days, I started talking to my neighbors, not to gossip about Sharon, but to introduce myself properly and get a feel for the neighborhood dynamics. What I discovered was illuminating. Most people were terrified of Sharon. She'd fined people for trivial violations, threatened legal action over minor disputes, and generally made everyone's life miserable if they didn't fall in line with her vision for the neighborhood. My next-door neighbor, a retired teacher named Miguel Rodriguez, was particularly helpful. He'd lived in Desert Springs Estates for 12 years and had watched Sharon's reign become increasingly authoritarian. "She started out reasonable," Miguel told me over coffee on his back patio. "But power went to her head. Last year she tried to fine me $500 because my grass was half an inch too long. Half an inch! I had to threaten to hire a lawyer before she backed down." "Why doesn't anyone vote her out?" I asked. Miguel sighed. "People have tried, but Sharon controls the election process. She sets the dates, counts the votes, and always seems to win. Plus, she's cultivated a group of supporters, usually people she's helped in some way or who share her views. They vote as a bloc." "That doesn't sound legal." "Probably isn't, but most people don't want to spend thousands on lawyers to fight an HOA. They just put up with it and hope she leaves them alone." That conversation solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about my EV charger anymore. Sharon was abusing her position, and someone needed to stop her. 2 weeks after filing the police report, I received a letter from the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. They were filing criminal charges against Sharon Whitmore, 1 count of criminal trespass in the 2nd degree and 1 count of criminal damage, which was classified as a Class 4 felony because the damage exceeded $2,000. The letter included a court date and information about the process. I'd need to testify at the preliminary hearing. If the case went to trial, I'd be the primary witness. I also filed a civil lawsuit in small claims court, suing Sharon personally for the cost of the damaged charger, the cost of my replacement cable, the cost of the security cameras I'd had to purchase, lost work time from having to deal with all this, and punitive damages. In total, I was asking for $7,500. When Sharon was served with the criminal summons in the civil lawsuit, she apparently lost her mind. I know this because she left a 7-minute voicemail on my phone, screaming about how I was destroying the neighborhood, how I was a troublemaker, and how she was going to make my life a living hell. I saved that voicemail and sent a copy to both the county attorney and my civil lawyer because it sure sounded like witness intimidation and harassment to me. The preliminary hearing for the criminal case was scheduled for mid-March, about 6 weeks after the incident. The civil case would come later. I took a day off work and showed up at the Scottsdale courthouse wearing a suit, carrying a folder with all my documentation organized and ready. Sharon was there with her lawyer, a guy in an expensive suit who looked like he charged $500 an hour. She looked furious, sitting ramrod straight in her chair and refusing to look in my direction. The preliminary hearing was fairly quick. The prosecutor presented the evidence, my testimony, the video footage, Officer Mendez's report, and photos of the damage. Sharon's lawyer tried to argue that the video was inadmissible because I hadn't informed Sharon she was being recorded, but the prosecutor shut that down immediately. Arizona is a one-party consent state, and besides, I had every right to record my own property. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia Chen, reviewed the video footage on a laptop. I watched her face as she watched Sharon cutting my charger cable. Her expression darkened. "Mrs. Whitmore," Judge Chen said, looking up. "Did you cut the plaintiff's charging cable?" Sharon's lawyer whispered something to her. She cleared her throat. "I did remove a cable that I believed was a safety hazard and a violation of HOA regulations." "With scissors? At 2 a.m? Without notifying the property owner or any authorities?" "I was acting in my capacity as HOA president to protect the neighborhood." Judge Chen stared at her for a long moment. "That's not how any of this works. The evidence is overwhelming. This case will proceed to trial. Bail is set at $5,000. Sharon's face went pale. "Bail? You're treating me like a common criminal?" "You are accused of a felony, Mrs. Whitmore. Consider yourself fortunate I'm not setting it higher given the clear evidence of the offense." Sharon's lawyer posted bail immediately, and they left the courthouse without a word to me. The prosecutor, a sharp young woman named Rachel Kim, seemed pleased with how things had gone. "Most judges would have taken a harsher view," she told me afterward. "The video evidence is extremely compelling. I'd be very surprised if this goes to trial. I expect they'll offer a plea deal." "What kind of deal?" "Probably plead down to a misdemeanor, restitution, probation, maybe some community service. It depends on whether your neighbor has any prior record and how reasonable her lawyer is." "And if she doesn't take a deal?" Rachel smiled. "Then we go to trial, and with that video evidence, we'll win. But trials are expensive and time-consuming. Most defendants in her position take the deal." The civil case was scheduled for April, giving me time to prepare. I documented everything: receipts for the charger, receipts for the replacement cable, receipts for the security cameras, my time logs showing hours spent dealing with this mess, even my extra fuel costs from having to use superchargers. In the meantime, life in the neighborhood became uncomfortable. Sharon's supporters, a group of about 5 or 6 residents who seemed to share her views, began a whisper campaign against me. I heard through Miguel that they were telling people I was a litigious troublemaker who'd attacked poor Sharon for trying to maintain neighborhood standards. But something interesting happened. As word spread about the video evidence and what Sharon had actually done, more neighbors started coming forward with their own stories of HOA abuse. She'd fined people excessively for trivial violations. She'd denied reasonable architectural requests without giving reasons. She'd misused HOA funds to pay for landscaping at her own house. A group of about 15 residents approached me about organizing a recall election for the HOA board. They wanted Sharon removed from her position. I agreed to help, but I wanted to wait until the legal cases were resolved first. In late March, Rachel Kim called me with news. Sharon's lawyer had offered a plea deal. Sharon would plead guilty to misdemeanor criminal damage, pay full restitution for the charger and cable, accept 1 year of probation, and perform 80 hours of community service. The trespassing charge would be dropped. "What do you think?" Rachel asked. "Does this mean she admits she was wrong?" "A guilty plea is an admission. It'll be on her record, and the restitution means she's paying for all the damage." I thought about it. Part of me wanted to see her go through a full trial, but the practical part of my brain knew that would mean more time, more stress, and no guarantee of a better outcome. "I'll accept it," I said, "as long as the restitution includes everything: the charger unit itself, installation costs, the replacement cable, everything. I'll make sure it's itemized properly." 2 weeks later, Sharon appeared before Judge Chen again and formally entered her guilty plea. She had to stand there and admit on the record that she had criminally damaged my property. I was in the courtroom to witness it. Sharon looked like she'd aged 5 years. Her expression was tight and bitter. Judge Chen accepted the plea and set the terms. Sharon would pay $4,200 in restitution to cover the full cost of replacing and reinstalling my charger system. She'd complete 80 hours of community service within 6 months. She'd be on probation for 1 year, during which any further criminal violations would result in jail time. Mrs. Whitmore, Judge Chen said, I want to be very clear. Your position as HOA president does not give you the right to vandalize other people's property. If you have concerns about HOA violations, there are proper legal channels to address them. What you did was destructive, illegal, and frankly, petty. I hope you'll use this probation period to reflect on your behavior. Sharon nodded stiffly, said, Yes, Your Honor, and left the courthouse. The civil case proceeded in April. This was in small claims court, which had a more informal atmosphere but still required proper documentation. I brought 3 copies of everything, all my receipts, all my time logs, printouts of relevant HOA bylaws, the police report, the criminal case documents, and the video evidence on a laptop. Sharon showed up without a lawyer this time, probably because the small claims amount didn't justify legal fees. She'd brought her own binder of documents, which I assumed was her attempt to justify her actions through HOA rules. The judge for small claims was a man named Robert Hernandez, who'd probably heard 1,000 HOA disputes over his career. He listened patiently as I presented my case, showing the evidence of Sharon's repeated trespassing and the ultimate destruction of my property. Then it was Sharon's turn. She stood up and launched into a 15-minute speech about neighborhood standards, property values, and the importance of maintaining the character of Desert Springs Estates. She tried to argue that my EV charger was against HOA rules, that I should have done more to get explicit approval, and that she'd only been trying to protect the community. Judge Hernandez let her finish, then asked, Mrs. Whitmore, did you at any point notify Mr. Torres of your concerns before taking action? Sharon hesitated. I don't believe formal notification was necessary given the clear violation. Did you call an HOA board meeting to discuss this issue? The matter required immediate action. Did you consult the HOA's attorney before destroying Mr. Torres's property? I acted on my authority as president. Judge Hernandez looked down at the documents in front of him. Mr. Torres submitted an architectural modification request. According to the HOA bylaws he's provided, failure to respond within 30 days constitutes approval. Your association failed to respond for 47 days before his charger was installed. That means it was approved. I never saw that request, Sharon insisted. Mr. Torres has a certified mail receipt with your signature. Sharon's face reddened. Then it must have been lost in the mail or misfiled. But you did receive it, since you signed for it. Whether you read it or filed it properly is your responsibility as HOA president, not Mr. Torres's fault. The judge reviewed my itemized list of damages. He asked questions about each item, verified the receipts matched the claims, and examined the video evidence of the damage. Then he made his ruling. The evidence overwhelmingly supports Mr. Torres. Not only did Mrs. Whitmore trespass on his property multiple times, but she destroyed expensive equipment that was properly approved under HOA procedures. Her claim that she was acting in her official capacity doesn't excuse illegal behavior. I'm awarding Mr. Torres the full amount requested, $7,500, which includes replacement costs, security equipment costs, lost time, and punitive damages. Mrs. Whitmore, you have 30 days to pay this judgment. Sharon looked like she'd been slapped. She stood there for a moment, mouth opening and closing, before finally gathering her papers and storming out of the courtroom. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was finally over. The criminal case was resolved, the civil case was won, and Sharon had been held accountable for her actions. But I wasn't quite done yet. With the legal cases settled, I turned my attention to the HOA itself. I reached out to all the neighbors who'd expressed frustration with Sharon's leadership. We organized a meeting at Miguel's house, and 23 residents showed up. That was more than enough to call a special election under the HOA bylaws. I'd spent time really studying those bylaws, and I'd discovered that Sharon had been violating them left and right. The HOA was supposed to have 5 board members, but Sharon had been the only active member for 3 years. The other positions were vacant, which meant she'd been making all decisions unilaterally. That wasn't legal under the association's own rules. We drafted a petition calling for a special election to fill all 5 board positions. We needed signatures from 20% of the homeowners to force the election. With 47 houses in Desert Springs Estates, we needed 10 signatures. We got 32. Sharon tried to fight it, claiming the petition was improperly formatted, but we'd followed the bylaws to the letter. We'd even had a lawyer review the petition to make sure everything was correct. She had no grounds to refuse. The special election was held in early May at the community center. We'd publicized it extensively, putting flyers in every mailbox and sending emails to everyone on the HOA list. 41 of the 47 households sent representatives. Sharon ran for re-election, of course. She gave a speech about her years of service and how she'd maintained property values. But then several people stood up and shared their own stories of HOA abuse. Miguel talked about the grass-length fine. Another neighbor, a woman named Patricia, described how Sharon had denied her request to install a wheelchair ramp, claiming it was aesthetically unpleasing, even though it was a medical necessity. A younger couple talked about how Sharon had tried to fine them for painting their front door navy blue instead of black. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. I believe in HOAs that work for all residents, not just the president's personal preferences. I believe in following our own rules and treating everyone fairly. That's the kind of community I want to live in. The vote wasn't even close. Sharon received 4 votes, probably from her core supporters. Miguel was elected president with 31 votes. 4 other reasonable people were elected to fill the remaining board positions. I declined to run, saying I was happy to help but didn't want a formal position yet. Sharon's face during the vote count was something I'll never forget. She looked absolutely devastated, like her entire identity had been wrapped up in being HOA president. And without it, she didn't know who she was. The new board's first action was to conduct a financial audit of HOA accounts. What they found was disturbing. Sharon had been using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, disguising them as neighborhood improvements. Over 3 years, she'd misappropriated about $18,000. This information was turned over to the police, and Sharon was charged with theft and fraud. That case was beyond my involvement, but I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she eventually pleaded guilty to those charges as well and had to pay full restitution plus additional fines. By mid-May, Sharon and her husband put their house up for sale. I wasn't surprised. The combination of criminal convictions, financial judgments, and complete loss of social standing in the neighborhood must have been too much. They moved out in June, and I never saw her again. My new ChargePoint charger was installed by early April, this time with an additional locked protective housing around the connection point. I never had another problem with it. Every night, I'd plug in my Tesla, and every morning, it was fully charged. The new HOA board was night and day different from Sharon's regime. They responded to requests promptly, held regular meetings, and made decisions collaboratively. Miguel turned out to be an excellent president, fair and reasonable while still maintaining neighborhood standards. In July, the board formally apologized to me for Sharon's actions and reimbursed me for my legal fees from a special fund they had established for correcting past wrongs. I didn't expect that, but it was appreciated. I also started dating someone I'd met through all of this. Patricia, the woman with the wheelchair ramp situation, had a sister named Olivia Norton who'd come to help her navigate the HOA dispute. Olivia and I hit it off immediately, bonding over our shared experiences with HOA absurdity. She was a paralegal, which meant she'd been able to give me some helpful advice during the legal cases. By summer, we were seeing each other regularly. Looking back on the whole experience, I learned several important lessons. First, documentation is everything. Without those security cameras and video evidence, it would have been my word against Sharon's, and as HOA president, she probably would have won that battle. Second, standing up to bullies is necessary even when it's uncomfortable and expensive. If I had just accepted Sharon's behavior, she would have continued abusing her power over me and everyone else in the neighborhood. Third, most people are reasonable and decent. They just need someone to stand up first. Once I took action against Sharon, dozens of neighbors found the courage to share their own stories and demand change. The cost of everything, between legal fees, replacement equipment, and time, was probably close to $8,000 even after the reimbursements. But it was worth it. I wasn't going to be bullied in my own home, and I wasn't going to let Sharon continue terrorizing an entire neighborhood just because she had a title and an inflated sense of authority. My house in Desert Springs Estates was no longer just a place I'd bought. It was truly home. I had good neighbors, a functional HOA, a fully operational EV charger, and eventually a girlfriend who thought my willingness to fight the absurd fight was admirable rather than crazy. One evening in August, I was sitting on my back patio with Olivia, watching the desert sunset paint the sky in oranges and purples. My Tesla was plugged in and charging without incident. Miguel was next door, grilling something that smelled amazing. The community pool was full of kids and families enjoying the cooling evening. "Do you regret any of it?" Olivia asked me. "All the stress, the legal battles, the confrontation." I thought about it for a moment. Not for a second. Sharon was wrong and somebody needed to stop her. I'm just glad it worked out. "You know, half the neighborhood thinks you're a hero, right? Miguel told me at least 5 people have said they wish they'd stood up to her years ago." I laughed. "I'm not a hero. I just didn't want to deal with someone unplugging my car every night." "Well, whatever your motivation, you changed things for the better. That counts for something." She was right, of course. The neighborhood was better now. People seemed happier, more relaxed. The oppressive atmosphere that Sharon had created was gone, replaced by something that actually felt like community. My phone buzzed with a notification from my ChargePoint app, charging complete, 100% battery. I smiled. Such a simple thing, really. Just being able to charge my car without someone sabotaging it. But it represented something larger. The right to live peacefully in your own home without someone else's personal crusades interfering with your life. The legal system had worked, ultimately. It had been slow and expensive and frustrating, but it had worked. Sharon had faced consequences for her actions. The criminal conviction would stay on her record. The financial judgments had cost her thousands of dollars. Her reputation was destroyed, and most importantly, she'd lost the position of power she'd been abusing. I never found out exactly why Sharon had such a problem with electric vehicles. Maybe it was political, maybe it was generational, maybe she genuinely believed they were harming the neighborhood somehow. It didn't really matter. Whatever her reasoning, it didn't justify trespassing, vandalism, and harassment. The HOA, under Miguel's leadership, actually approved several other residents to install EV chargers after my case was resolved. Turns out, 4 other people in the neighborhood had been considering it but had been afraid of Sharon's reaction. Now there were 6 houses with chargers, and the neighborhood hadn't descended into chaos or lost property value. In fact, having EV charging infrastructure probably made the houses more attractive to buyers. In September, I got a letter from the Maricopa County court system informing me that Sharon had completed her community service hours and her probation would be ending in October, assuming she stayed out of trouble. The restitution had been paid in full. As far as the criminal justice system was concerned, her debt to society was paid. I felt no animosity toward her at that point. I didn't celebrate her misfortune or feel vindictive. I just felt relieved that the whole ordeal was behind me. She'd made bad choices, faced consequences, and hopefully learned something from the experience. Olivia and I were getting serious by fall. She basically lived at my place half the time, and we'd started talking about moving in together officially. She loved the house, loved the neighborhood, and got along great with all my neighbors. Patricia was thrilled that her sister had found someone, and Miguel treated Olivia like an adopted daughter, constantly inviting us over for dinners. One October evening, we had a neighborhood block party. The HOA board had organized it as a way to bring everyone together and celebrate the new community atmosphere. Someone had rented a bounce house for the kids. There were grills going, a buffet table full of potluck dishes, and music playing from someone's excellent sound system. I stood there with Olivia, holding a beer and watching kids run around while adults chatted and laughed. This was what a neighborhood should feel like. Not oppressive rules enforced by a petty tyrant, but actual community built on mutual respect and reasonable standards. Miguel came over with his wife, Rosa. "Quentin, I want to thank you again for everything you did. This," He gestured at the party, at the neighbors enjoying themselves. This wouldn't have happened under Sharon. People were afraid to even talk to each other because they didn't want word getting back to her. "You're the one who stepped up to be president," I said. "You're doing the actual work. Only because you showed us it was possible to challenge her. You took the risk first." Rosa nodded enthusiastically. "Miguel wanted to do something years ago, but he was worried about the legal costs, about making things worse. When you stood up to her, it gave everyone else courage." It was humbling, honestly. I hadn't thought of myself as particularly courageous. I'd just been a guy who was tired of his car charger getting unplugged and decided to do something about it. But I guess sometimes taking that first stand, even over something small, can inspire others. The block party went until after dark. Olivia and I finally walked back to my house around 9, pleasantly tired and full of good food. My Tesla was in the garage, plugged in, charging peacefully. No drama, no sabotage, no midnight visits from angry HOA presidents. "You know what I realized?" Olivia said as we got ready for bed. "You never actually told me why you chose an electric car in the first place." I laughed. "That's true. Honestly, it started as a practical decision. I did the math on fuel savings versus the car payment, and it made sense. Plus, the technology is cool. I'm a software engineer. I appreciate good tech. And yeah, there's an environmental component, but that wasn't the main driver. And now? Now I'm even more convinced it was the right choice, not just because of the car itself, but because standing up for my right to own it and charge it led to so much positive change. If I'd just accepted Sharon's interference or switched back to a gas car to make her happy, she'd still be terrorizing the neighborhood." Olivia kissed me. "I'm glad you're stubborn." Stubborn or principled? Both. Definitely both. The next morning was a Saturday. I woke up to find my Tesla at 100% charge, as expected. I made coffee, checked my email, and saw a message from Rachel Kim, the prosecutor from my case. She was just checking in to make sure I'd received confirmation that Sharon had completed all the terms of her plea agreement. I replied thanking her for her professionalism throughout the case. I also had an email from ChargePoint asking if I'd be willing to share my story for their blog about overcoming obstacles to home charging. I politely declined. The whole ordeal had become somewhat public within the neighborhood and local EV community, and I'd had a few interview requests from local news outlets, but I'd turned them all down. I wasn't interested in publicity or attention. I just wanted to charge my car in peace. Life settled into a comfortable routine over the following months. Work was going well. I'd gotten a promotion at my software company. Olivia officially moved in with me in November, and we adopted a dog from a local shelter, a goofy golden retriever mix named Buster, who loved riding in the Tesla's spacious back seat. The HOA continued to function smoothly under Miguel's leadership. They fixed several long-standing maintenance issues that Sharon had ignored, updated the community website, and generally made life better for everyone. Property values actually increased, which disproved Sharon's theory that being reasonable would harm the neighborhood. I sometimes wondered what Sharon was doing and whether she'd reflected on her behavior. I heard she'd moved to somewhere in Tucson, but I never confirmed it. It didn't matter. She was no longer my problem, no longer the neighborhood's problem. The security cameras I'd installed to catch her stayed up. They'd proven useful beyond the original purpose, capturing a package thief a few months later and helping police recover stolen items. Several neighbors installed their own cameras after that, and the neighborhood became much safer overall. By the time spring rolled around again, marking a full year since the court cases, I barely thought about the Sharon situation anymore. It had become just another story, the kind of thing you tell at parties when someone complains about their own HOA. "Oh, you think that's bad? Let me tell you about the time my HOA president cut my EV charger cable with scissors." Olivia and I got engaged in April, right around the anniversary of the civil court judgment. We were hiking in Sedona when I proposed, with the red rocks glowing in the sunset. She said yes, obviously, and we started planning a wedding for the following year. Miguel and Rosa threw us an engagement party at their house, and most of the neighborhood came. It felt good to celebrate something positive in the same community that had been so toxic a year earlier. People brought gifts, shared congratulations, and told stories about their favorite Quentin and Olivia moments. During the party, a newer neighbor who'd moved in a few months earlier asked me about the story he'd heard involving the previous HOA president and an EV charger. I gave him the abbreviated version, hitting the main points without dwelling on the drama. "So she actually cut your charging cable?" he asked, incredulous, "with scissors, at 2 in the morning, on camera. That's insane. What was she thinking?" "I honestly don't know. Some people get a little power and completely lose perspective." He shook his head. "Well, I'm glad it worked out, and I'm glad she's gone. The HOA here is so reasonable compared to our last neighborhood. I actually read through all the bylaws before we bought, because we'd had problems before, and everything seemed fair. Now I know why." That was the thing about the whole experience. It hadn't just affected me or just removed a problem president. It had fundamentally improved the neighborhood for everyone, including people who hadn't even lived there during the Sharon era. The new board's fairness and professionalism had become the new normal, and it attracted reasonable people who wanted to live in a well-managed community. The wedding planning kept us busy through the summer and fall. We decided to have it at a beautiful venue in North Scottsdale with desert landscaping and mountain views. Miguel agreed to officiate. He'd gotten ordained online specifically so he could perform the ceremony. Rosa was helping Olivia with planning details. Patricia was a bridesmaid. Half the neighborhood was invited. On a warm October evening, almost exactly 2 years after I'd first discovered Sharon unplugging my charger, Olivia and I got married surrounded by friends, family, and neighbors. It was perfect. The ceremony was heartfelt, the reception was joyful, and I couldn't imagine being happier. During his toast, Miguel made a joke about how Olivia should be grateful to Sharon for bringing us together since we'd met because of the HOA drama. Everyone laughed, including us. He was right in a weird way. If Sharon hadn't gone off the deep end about my EV charger, I never would have gotten involved in the neighborhood drama, never would have met Patricia during the HOA reform efforts, and never would have been introduced to Olivia. "So here's to Sharon," Miguel said, raising his glass with a grin. "The worst HOA president in Desert Springs Estates history, and inadvertently, Quentin and Olivia's matchmaker." The crowd erupted in laughter and raised their glasses. It was the perfect way to acknowledge that difficult chapter while celebrating how much better things had become. Later that night, after the reception ended and Olivia and I were alone in our hotel suite before leaving for our honeymoon in Hawaii, she asked me if I'd ever imagined things would turn out this way. "2 years ago, when Sharon cut your charger cable, did you think it would lead here?" she asked. I pulled her close. "Not even a little bit. I just wanted my car to charge. I had no idea it would lead to criminal charges, civil court, HOA reform, and meeting you. Life is weird. Life is very weird, but I'm not complaining." We spent 2 weeks in Maui, snorkeling, hiking, eating amazing food, and generally enjoying being newlyweds. When we got back to Scottsdale, back to our house in Desert Springs Estates, it felt like coming home in the deepest sense. This wasn't just where I lived. It was where I belonged. My Tesla was in the garage, exactly where I'd left it. Olivia's Prius was parked next to it. Both charging ports were occupied, both cars quietly charging from the desert sun via our solar panels. No drama, no interference, no HOA, presidents with scissors and bad attitudes. Buster greeted us at the door with enthusiastic tail-wagging, having been watched by Miguel and Rosa while we were gone. The house was exactly as we'd left it. The neighborhood was peaceful and quiet. I walked out to the garage and looked at my charge point unit, the replacement for the one Sharon had destroyed. It was such an ordinary piece of equipment, really. Just a box on the wall with a cable that plugged into my car. But it represented so much more than that. The right to make your own choices, the importance of standing up to bullies, the value of community, and the power of documentation and persistence. If I hadn't installed those cameras, I never would have been able to prove what Sharon was doing. If I hadn't been willing to go through the stress and expense of legal action, she would have continued her behavior. If I hadn't reached out to neighbors and organized the recall election, the HOA would still be dysfunctional. But I did all those things, and it made a difference. That's the real lesson from this whole absurd situation. One person standing up, documenting the truth, and following through can create change. It's not easy, it's not cheap, and it's not comfortable. but it's worth it. I plugged in my Tesla, watched the charging indicator light up green, and went back inside to start unpacking. Olivia was in the kitchen, making tea and playing with Buster. Through the window, I could see Miguel watering his lawn and Rosa tending her garden. A couple of kids were riding bikes down the street. Everything was normal, peaceful, and good. This was what I'd fought for. Not just the right to charge my car, but the right to live in a community that functioned properly, that treated people fairly, that didn't allow petty tyrants to abuse their power. And in the end, against all odds and through a lot of frustration, that's exactly what I got. Sometimes I still think about Sharon. I wonder if she ever realized how disproportionate her response was, how she destroyed her own reputation and position over something so trivial. I wonder if she learned anything from the experience, or if she just blamed everyone else for her downfall. But mostly, I don't think about her at all. She's a footnote in my life story, the antagonist in one chapter who was defeated and moved on. My life is so much bigger than that conflict now. I have a wife I love, a home I'm proud of, a career that's thriving, and a community that functions the way communities should. I have an electric vehicle that charges reliably every single night, solar panels that help power my house, and a golden retriever who thinks every day is the best day ever. Sharon tried to make my life miserable over an EV charger, and instead, by standing up to her, I ended up with a better life than I ever imagined. That's the real victory. Not the court cases or the judgments or seeing her lose her position. The real victory is the life I built afterward, the positive changes that rippled out from one person's refusal to be bullied. Every time I plug in my Tesla now, I think about that, about how standing up for something small, something that seemed trivial to some people, led to something meaningful and lasting, about how documentation and persistence can overcome abuse of power, about how one person's courage can inspire others to stand up too. And every morning when I wake up to a fully charged car, ready to take me wherever I need to go, I'm reminded that it was all worth it. The neighborhood continues to thrive. The HOA board is functional and fair. My neighbors are friends. My marriage is strong. And my EV charger works perfectly, night after night after night, exactly as it should. That's the end of the story, really. Not with dramatic confrontation or revenge, but with something better. A peaceful, normal life in a well-functioning community. Sometimes the best endings are the quiet ones, where justice is served, changes are made, and everyone moves forward to something better. And if anyone ever asks me about the time my HOA president unplugged my EV charger every night, I can honestly say it's one of the best things that ever happened to me. Not because of the conflict itself, but because of everything that came after. Because I stood up, fought back, and won not just the court cases, but something more valuable: a home, a community, and a life worth living.